What's up, Union Arena players? This is Kyle D, better known as Universities, and today we have a fun little tier list for you guys, especially because guess what this weekend is? We have a big regional level event for the players to enjoy, so I figured it would be a good time to drop one for you guys to enjoy. So without further ado, let's dive in the video and talk about it. So first off, let's get into it. Bambies. I definitely think it's still a good tier 2 deck. Kind of low tier 2. I wouldn't say tier 3, to be honest with you. Actually, I can't just spit out a lot because I'm not doing 1.5. There's one rule about 1.5 I don't like. It feels like a participation trophy because people are going to go, oh, tier 2 should always be the rogue decks and stuff like that. I feel kind of like tier 3 at times can kind of fill that slot because, again, usually it does well into the local scenes because A, it just has that good presence, and then B, you have other options to come into the fray. I think at the end of the day, our good choices, Bambies, zombies, whatever you want to call it, has a good matchup into the tier 2 lineup that it can still be explosive and hard to deal with. But once you start getting to the tier 1s, it struggles a little bit because A, the tier 1s have a lot better removal packages, and that's usually the harder challenge, right? So we do have the new Byakuya Kuchiki. So this one got boosted in the binder, and I definitely think this is a deck to be thought of and recognized for. The fact that the new Renji plus the Byakuya is just such a good threat in its own right. I think a lot of players sleep on these kind of decks, and it's super important to keep that in mind, especially when we have later decks in the format. Kenny Kenpachi Zaraki, definitely with the new binder stuff, really boosted the deck up for our format. Kenny is still super strong into a lot of purple decks in the format, and it can hold its own in certain matchups because A, if your deck isn't having the right removal at the right time, Kenny just shuts down that DP minus threshold. So that means decks that want to lower those attack points are going to have a little bit more trouble doing so. You know, Kenny is going to do what it needs to. Renji Rush, I would say this version, definitely a tier 2 deck. I think it came down just a little bit. The reason why, I think, is that the meta sped up a little bit faster than it. Renji still costs you an AP to deal that double damage, which again, it's supposed to be an aggro deck, right? But at the same time, I just don't feel like it's that tier 1 scary deck. Yes, Confident Pilots will definitely bring it into the fray, and this could easily do well into, you know, the current meta. But at the same time, you just have to be really good with the deck. Personally, it's not my playstyle. I don't like it. I would rather play the Rukia version, which is another great option. And I feel like it's not tier 1 status anymore. I definitely think Byakuya brings in that tier 1 because A, it makes unfavorable trades, and B, you know, it does use the Renji as well as an option because A, it's where the aggression gets while Byakuya kind of just cleans up house later on in the matchup. So yeah, I think that's where we're going to put that. Specified slots, I definitely think it's a tier 3 deck that does well into a tier 2 format. But if you have, you know, getting into the tier 1s, it's a little more challenging for the deck. But if you're facing against it, it's not terrible, right? I think slots are pretty good. I wouldn't say it's like a tier 4 deck, but definitely tier 3 into the tier 2 format. Again, you're not facing these overly powerful Kenshin decks or Kaiju, you know, number 8 style decks. You're kind of in a good spot, right? So think about that. Bombers, definitely a solid deck into the tier 2, tier 3, and above. So I wouldn't say it's bad, but once you start getting the tier 1 category, that's when the deck kind of struggles a little bit, right? I think the same thing happened with Kurapika, is that it did its one trick pony, and it's fallen down a bit. I would definitely say in a tier 2 local level where you have all different variety decks, Kurapika can do some stuff. But if you have a lot of sweats in the format and they're playing a lot of tier 1 decks and you're facing one after another, it's just not going to be a good time. So I definitely think this is where the deck kind of lands, right? Then we have none other than the boy. This boy here, Megami, is pretty solid, actually. I would say it's a very solid tier 3 deck. The deck still plays super aggressive and can do extremely well into tier 2s. So definitely keep Megami in your mind that, you know, Megami being able to bring in those multi-familiars for their attack patterns, and once they get the garden up, it's a very hard time dealing with it, right? We don't have a lot of site removal in the format, so being able to play into that is really good. Toto, we definitely know booty claps all day long, and it's definitely one of the tier 1 decks. I would not say it's a tier 2 deck. Definitely tier 1. It's a threat that's always topped, even in the Kenshin format. And again, they switched into having Miwa into the list to deal with Red Kenshin. A lot of people have adapted to Red Kenshin's playstyle, and again, I would put Red Kenshin probably right in underneath this, but we'll keep going. Mahito definitely needs some better support. They can deal with the tier 3s, but once you start getting to tier 2, tier 1 category, it's just not pulling off the tricks that it needs to. That's kind of its big thing. Sukuna. The unrestriction definitely brought the deck a little bit of love that it needed, but I would not say it's a tier 1 deck. The format has changed, and we are now in a more aggressive style of play, and that's really where the deck struggles to kind of evolve, right? You know, once the decks kind of get underneath it, and even if we take that into account of Kento's version, both decks, if you get underneath them, they're just not having a good time. Again, a lot of other decks are very powerful. They're going to top and do well. So definitely this is where I'm thinking this goes. Purple Code, still very tier 1 strong deck. We've seen where decks go. Actually, let me rethink this. Like, I want to say tier 1 is Purple Code, right? But at the same time, it hasn't done much, right? Since the format has evolved. There are players that are very diehards and everything like that, but I would say it's a very strong deck. Players know what they're doing with it, but I wouldn't put it as the end-all be-all cap here. Decks have evolved to kind of do what Purple Code is trying to do and do it a little bit better, or they've done it in a way that players know what Purple Code does enough. It's the same thing like a learning curve against Red Kenshin. Once you know what the deck kind of can do against you, you're kind of in a good spot, right? You know, better removal packages kind of hurt, you know, Gawain. Again, Toto can easily go head-to-head with this deck. You know, Byakuya definitely is doing what this deck wants to do, but can do it a little more aggressively with a combination of board, you know, control. So I think at the end of the day, being what this deck does, I think this is where it will go. I think still players can bring this in and still have a good time against the tier 1s. I'm not saying this is like the, you know, being tier 2 is not a bad thing. You know, if somebody had a 1.5, that would be a different story. But I have tier 2 as my cap. So we do have Lancelot. I definitely think it's still one of the tier 1 category decks. A lot of players have to be respective of it. This deck has 5Ks in it and can be very threatening against a lot of matchups. Lancelot does answer a lot of things. Red Asteroid Academy, I would say it's pretty good. Actually not. I would say it's just needs to get better. If they ever do what they're doing with Rukia and the Asta, and this card gets the support it needs, and it's full power Nonali, yeah, I definitely think it'll come right back up to tier 2. But the deck's missing that Nonali. That Nonali was really what that deck always needs, and it's always going to shine brightest when it has access to that. Now, we do have Tanjiro Nezuko. This deck's pretty good, pretty solid into the format. I would say it does extremely well into tier 2s, but once it starts getting into these tier 1 behemoths, it does not like them. Wave 2, definitely bring it back into the gatekeeper level. I wouldn't say tier 1, but definitely brings it up to tier 2 level. The Hashira deck, definitely say just give it better support at this point. Wave 2 will definitely help that out. Muzan, definitely way too slow into the format right now. Definitely would call it a dead deck. It's good for the funds, but at the same time, it'll do well into like a tier 3, tier 4 lineup. Daki, same thing. Just not doing too well. I would kind of go like these are our standards, right? Here, for dead deck can be definitely good for a local level, like not super competitive locals. You'll definitely have some fun, right? That's kind of where I'm sitting at. Then we do have Esper Sisters. Esper Sisters, definitely a solid tier 3 deck. I would want to put it at tier 2, but it's definitely a pilot depender, right? If it's a pilot depender, we'll put it up here, actually, because Esper Sisters still does well. And a good confident pilot on Esper Sisters can really, really dominate where you want to go with it. I think that's super important to take into account, because when you take an Esper Sisters power level, it really shines brightly for it. Now, Saitama definitely has fallen off a bit. I wouldn't call it a tier 2 deck anymore, and I wouldn't call it tier 1 in any way, shape, or form. Anybody telling you that is incorrect. The deck had its moment of shine, but we're back into a format that's just can get underneath it way too comfortably. Metal Bat, definitely solid tier 3. Not terrible. Like, I could definitely go on for a regional level. I would say Metal Bat on a good professional, someone that knows what they're doing, really good. Once we get the support, there's a power-up pack that JP just got with Metal Bat. I think it'll definitely bring it into tier 2 category, if not back into tier 1. Green Saitama, still very much a scary deck. I would say bottom tier, top tier 3, bottom tier 2. Deck still plays this unique way. As long as you don't face a hyper aggressive format, deck will blow you out of the water. This deck just focuses on keeping your board clear and just dealing with everything you got. So, something to think about there. I'm still a diehard on this deck here. Speedo Sound Sonic, very powerful deck, right? Conditions to make this thing multi-attack, stupid good. Very powerful, what your opponent has to be ready for. And I definitely think solid here for tier 3. I wouldn't say it's tier 2. You know, my heart would say, yeah, it's going to be able to compete and just people are sleeping on it for tier 2. But, you know, Speedo Sound is pretty decent in tier 3. I think it does extremely well in the tier 3 to tier 2s. It can pop off. But then once it starts getting tier 1s, that's where it struggles a little bit. Garu's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's tier 2 or anything like that, but definitely tier 3 category. Integrity Knights, decent tier 3. I think Alice, the Goddesses deck, is definitely a solid tier 2 deck. Just very powerful, skilled, dependent. If I'm talking like that, we should definitely put these two into tier 2. Definitely good with pilots. Can really take on some of the meta, especially when you're getting against Lance, the Gawain deck. You can definitely take them on head on. Would say that blue SAO, definitely, you know, Kirito, Asuna swap deck, definitely solid tier 3. Wouldn't go above that. Definitely has fallen down from the tier 2 category that I would keep it at, but it's just, that's where it's going. Definitely the Lifa deck, definitely fallen down a bit. I would say just give it better. I would just say kind of just like a dead deck. Same thing with Yuki's deck, kind of just dead. They definitely need their volume 2 support to kind of pop off. Sion, I wouldn't call it a tier 2 deck at all. And wouldn't say it's like a regional viable. I think the problem comes down to it's got potential, but that volume 2 support is where this deck shines brightly, right? I think that's where you need it, and if you don't have it, you're going to be struggling a bit here. So I definitely think that's where this is at. Red Asta Tribal here, just give it some better support. Same thing here with, you know, definitely tier 3 with the tree, because again, if you can get this to pop off, and you have enough time in the tier 3 to tier 4 to tier 5 category, so yeah, we'll say it does well here, but once you start getting tier 1s, it kind of struggles a little bit. Yeah, this one here, the tribal deck for green, I definitely think just needs a little bit better support. Red Asta, definitely solid tier 3 deck. Wouldn't say it's tier 1. It definitely popped off when you had the promo, right? The new card definitely helped the deck in power. I wouldn't say it's a bad deck. And I wouldn't say that, you know, you're missing out on pieces or anything like that. Red Asta definitely can take on a lot of good contenders. And again, can be explosive. Marisol with Noelle with the Red Asta promo, same thing, just very solid deck here. I think they're definitely tier 3 categoried. Brothers, Edward Elrics, definitely good, but definitely needs better support, especially in this format. I'm going to say Mustang is still one of the strongest tier 1 decks you're going to be coming across. There's no reason for you to sleep on this deck at all. I think if you're sleeping on it, you're just not playing the deck properly. Now, we do have Father. I would definitely say tier 4. Can definitely go into tier 3s, the 5s pretty comfortably, but once you start getting the tier 2, closer to tier 1s, it starts struggling. King Bradley, same thing. Just needs a little bit better support, and I think it'll shine brightly here. Levi, Levi's very interesting, right? I would definitely say tier 3 because it can play into the tier 2s, but then once you start seeing the tier 1s, that's where it struggles a little bit, right? Same thing with Historia. Can definitely do well into these categories and start combating the tier 2s. But once you start trying to get past certain tier 2 level, you know, you're struggling there. Same thing with Levi. Levi can do a lot of damage, but at the same time, it does struggle a little bit in that category. Massive Colossal Titan, I would definitely say tier 4. Red, you know, the low to the ground 4, definitely sneaky under it. I definitely think people are sleeping on this deck, and I think it's definitely a solid tier 2 deck. The deck has wonders. It can get underneath and just be super aggressive. And again, very explosive. And sometimes that's all you need. And boom, this deck can just clear house. 8, I would definitely think if you're going to be playing the Red Attack on Titan Big Boy, expect it to be a tier 3 version. New wave of support definitely changes this up and brings it right to tier 2, I think. But right now, it's just a little slow and clunky. Now we do have blue, one of the blue decks, Big Blue, we'll call this. This one is one of those weird decks. I think it's pretty solid, tier 3. I don't think it does well into tier 2 or tier 1. It can do some battle damage into tier 3, but once you start getting into tier 4, it'll do well in tier 4, a little bit in tier 3, but then has the problem of tier 2 backing it down. So, yeah. Same thing with Ninja Boy here. Definitely feeling like tier 4. Now, we do have this one, Seto, whatever his name is. This deck, definitely pretty well into the format, actually. Deck does have this problem of if you don't win with your explosive turns, you will lose. But again, very well rounded in the format. It comfortably plays into everything and doesn't actually feel like it doesn't feel like an unfair deck, and it doesn't feel unwinnable to play against. So definitely think that one through. This deck pretty solid for, you know, the villain, purple villain deck. Now we do have Sonosuke. Good. Definitely that hurt it more than it did Red Kenshin. I'm going to definitely say this right now. Red Kenshin is not tier 1. It is a gatekeeper deck. Straight up. It's a deck you respect, but it's not tier 1 anymore. I think players overhyped it last format, And now that people know how to play against the dang deck, the deck isn't as scary, right? People modified their list already to adapt to this threat. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, this is where we're going to be putting it here. This one, I definitely think for Yellow Kaiju, this one's pretty strong with Minana, blah, 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 blah. Can I speak? Apparently, I cannot. But, you know, the Mina deck is very powerful. Scythe Girl or Battle Axe Girl, definitely solid tier 2. I wouldn't put her below that. I definitely think she doesn't deserve that placing. I think Confident Pilots wise, she can do a lot of damage under the right circumstances. I don't think she's a tier 3 deck. She can definitely play into the tier 1s comfortably with a good pilot. So it's just really understanding what your deck can do, right? So super important there. Kaiju. Green Kaiju definitely feels like a tier 2 deck. Comforter Pilots can, especially on the right list, can make this deck shine brightly. It's one of those decks that demands reps, and if you have the reps, the deck shines really good for you. Knowing what your deck can do, the damage output you can do with it, knowing this is what you need to do here, there, blah, 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 blah. Boom. I definitely feel comfortable putting it in tier 2. This one, just give it better support. I don't think it plays well with others, really. I would borderline almost want to toss it here. I think it's the worst deck out of Kaiju, but out of them, you know, you still have 3 of your 4 decks sitting high up. Purple, this deck here, it just feels not good into the format. Brothers, definitely a deck you respect. I wouldn't say it's tier 1, but I definitely say tier 2 is pretty comfortably where I would want to put it. I think the brothers, little brother plus big brother, just nasty combination. Because we got the premium binder in the set, makes the deck very scary. Green, Yu, the sword deck, definitely solid tier 3. I wouldn't say tier 2, but definitely tier. No, what am I kidding? Nah, I'm trying to be serious here. Deck's good. Confident Pilot can definitely do some damage with it. Kurama, I definitely feel like people are sleeping on this. I would definitely say tier 3. Can do well into the tier 2 categories pretty comfortably. To be honest with you, was probably the best deck in Yu until they gave the binder collection and the brothers deck just got busted from it. You know, that's super important. You know, elder brother, little brother, boom. Yeah. Hirane, I would say wants to be there, but I can't comfortably give it more than a tier 4 setting. Yu himself, Yu Hakusho, definitely tier 3 bottom. I think it's strong, but I just can't comfortably say I would put it in tier 2. But at the same time, like, it's not dominating like how people would expect, right? Nikkei is one of those challenges, right? I think, you know, purple Nikkei is where solidifies here a bit more. And then yellow kind of sits in the tier 3 category. And then you kind of get into greens, like overall, like Alice is just not that good. And Laplace is like the strongest one out of the green, and it's only making itself like tier 4 status. Like you're gonna have a fun time with Nikkei, right? But if you're really gonna be competitive, it's gotta be even there. I have a challenge to actually put these at like tier 2. It feels like Nikkei was very underwhelming. It can do well into tier 2 best, right? But then once you start getting into the tier 1s, it's where it struggles a bit, right? I think that's the problem, and I can't comfortably say that it can win every tier 2 matchup, but I would say it does well into the tier 3s, tier 4s, tier 5s, but this is just where it just shines weakly. Even though the binder came out, I would say definitely You know, blue bleach, definitely tier 3. Can definitely do well into the tier 2 categories. Don't get me wrong. Then you got the tier 1s that are just a little too strong. I mean, Lancelot just eats the daylights out of Ichigo blue. And even with the new support, it's just not there enough yet, right? I would say... what is it? Squad 0. Still solid tier 2 deck. I would not claim that these decks are tier 1s at the moment. I think Byakuya is the tier 1 version because A, the new support is just that good for the deck, and it's just what the deck needed to really shine brightly. And again, it has a little bit better in the breathing room. Yes, you have the sight for this deck, but at the same time, that draw means you're fighting a turn against some of these decks that are just a little bit quicker, and you know, you have sight removal with, you know, Clappy Boy. You know, it's that real weird situation that Toto can answer a little bit more of your stuff, but at the same time, it's just really where it goes. Jujutsu Kaisen, this one, the villains version on red, tier 4 for sorcerers because A, it can do some crazy stuff, but it just needs a little something else, something. Rolo's deck, solid tier 4. Same thing with the Chinese Federation. This one, you know, the new Lancelot deck, I would say good, but yeah, I wouldn't put it past tier 4. Pizza, solid tier 3. You can do some stuff, but I wouldn't say it's good enough to get into. It's better than tier 4, but at the same time, Razors. Deck's just not doing much. But all in all, guys, I think this is where our tier list is going to sit. I think this is probably the best bet you're going to have. So what do you guys think of the tier list? Let me know down in the comments. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you next one. Peace.